The date was May 1st, 2023. The time was 7:05 a.m. On the runway at Ararquairas Airport in Colombia stood a small Cessna 206 aircraft with registration number HK2803, ready for takeoff. The flight's route map was very clear. It was scheduled to fly over the dense Amazon jungle, Chirribiquete National Park, and the Apaporis River, heading to San José del Guaviare. The pilot was the 7-year-old experienced Hernando Mora Morales, who had a solid 8,300 hours of flight experience. Seated next to him in the passenger seat were local indigenous leader Herman Mendoza and a mother, Maglena Mucutey Valencia, who was traveling with her 4 children in search of a safe future. The children were 18-year-old Leslie, 9-year-old Solani, 4-year-old Teen, and tiny 11-month-old Christine in her mother's arms. The family belonged to the Witoto community and was heading to the city to escape threats from jungle rebels. When the plane took off, everything was normal. The children were looking out the window at the endless green jungle. Maybe they were playing with each other or feeling safe in their mother's arms. But just 29 minutes after takeoff, at 7:34 a.m., the sound of the engine suddenly changed. A strange rattling noise, and then the engine began to lose power. The pilot immediately sent a mayday signal, but by then it was too late. The front of the plane dipped down and they began to fall straight toward those massive 100-year-old Amazon trees. Imagine the children's screams, the mother's terror, and the scene of facing death at that moment. The next instant, a massive explosion occurred. Tree branches snapped and the plane crashed into that part of the earth where sunlight barely reaches. After the explosion, a terrifying silence fell over the jungle, a silence that was even more frightening than the noise. When Maclena's eyes opened, all she saw was devastation. Pieces of the plane's iron were scattered everywhere, and the air smelled of fuel and wet earth. His head was badly split open. Blood was flowing. But a mother's heart beats only for her children. She saw that the pilot and the tribal leader were dead at the scene. Their breaths had stopped. Groaning in pain, Maclena called out to her children. Fortunately, or perhaps by some miracle, all 4 children were alive. But they were terrified and injured. 13-year-old Leslie's face was covered in blood. But she was holding her younger sister, Christine. This was the dense region of the Solano Caquetá, which the world calls the Green Hell. Here, man does not rule, but jaguars, anacondas, and venomous insects do. As evening fell, the jungle's true, terrifying face began to emerge. The moment the sun set, it became pitch black, so dark that they couldn't even see their own hands. And then the game of sounds began. Sometimes the soft patter of an animal's paws passing by. Sometimes the distant roar of a jaguar. That first night was nothing short of a nightmare. Huddled in the wreckage of the crashed plane, clinging to their injured mother, the 4 innocent souls spent their first night under the shadow of death. They had no idea that this was just the beginning. The real trial was yet to come. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun pierced through the dense foliage above, the scene was even more horrifying. The daylight revealed the devastation that the darkness of the night had hidden. The children saw that they were completely cut off from the world. All around them were only trees. No roads, no homes, no people. Leslie, the eldest of the siblings, showed wisdom. She first searched the plane wreckage to find something to eat. They found some biscuits, crackers, and bottles of water. They shared that little food among themselves. Mother McLean's condition was deteriorating by the moment. Her wounds were deep and she had lost a lot of blood. Still, she encouraged the children, hugging them and telling them that someone would surely come to rescue them. They stared at the sky, hoping to see a helicopter or a plane. But the Amazon canopy is so dense that it's nearly impossible to see anything on the ground from above. Every passing hour crushed their hope. They couldn't even see their own hands. And then the game of sounds began. Sometimes the soft patter of an animal's paws passing by. Sometimes the distant roar of a jaguar. That first night was nothing short of a nightmare. Huddled in the wreckage of the crashed plane, clinging to their injured mother, the 4 innocent souls spent their first night under the shadow of death. They had no idea that this was just the beginning. The real trial was yet to come. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun pierced through the dense foliage above, the scene was even more horrifying. The daylight revealed the devastation that the darkness of the night had hidden. The children saw that they were completely cut off from the world. All around them were only trees. No roads, no homes, no people. Leslie, the eldest of the siblings, showed wisdom. She first searched the plane wreckage to find something to eat. They found some biscuits, crackers, and bottles of water. They shared that little food among themselves. Mother McLean's condition was deteriorating by the moment. Her wounds were deep, and she had lost a lot of blood. Still, she encouraged the children, hugging them and telling them that someone would surely come to rescue them. They stared at the sky, hoping to see a helicopter or a plane, but the Amazon canopy is so dense that it's nearly impossible to see anything on the ground from above. Every passing hour crushed their hope. It was closed forever. Now there were only 4 children in the forest, one of them in a cradle, and there was no adult to protect them. Death had struck its first blow. After their mother's death, everything fell apart for a moment. The children cried and screamed, but the forest swallowed their voices. But then, 13-year-old Leslie wiped away her tears. She remembered what her mother had said, "Save yourself." To Leslie, she was more than just a sister. She became both mother and father to the 3 children. The upbringing of the Witoto tribal community had taught her the jungle's rules from childhood, and now that knowledge was going to be their shield. Leslie knew they couldn't stay near the plain any longer because the corpses would attract violent animals. She got to work immediately. She crawled into the wreckage and searched every corner. She found a packet of farinha, or cassava flour, a staple food for Amazonian indigenous people. She also grabbed some clothes, towels, a flashlight, and most importantly, a mosquito net. She knew the jungle mosquitoes could carry deadly diseases like malaria and dengue. Holding the hands of her younger siblings and carrying little Christine on her back, Leslie said goodbye to the crash site. They set off in an unknown direction where death lurked behind every bush. As they moved away from the plain, the jungle grew even denser and more terrifying. In this part of the Amazon, the trees were so tall and dense they completely covered the sky. Even at 12 p.m., it remains as dim as evening. The children couldn't tell when it was day and when it was night. The biggest problem was the weather there. No one knows when it will rain in the Amazon. Suddenly, a torrential downpour would begin and last for hours. They had no shelter to hide under. In their soaked clothes, the children would shiver violently from the cold. The threat of hypothermia loomed constantly. At night, Leslie would become a tiny architect. She would fashion a small shelter by weaving together large tree leaves, especially banana leaves and twigs. She would spread leaves on the wet ground so the children wouldn't get cold. In the silence of the night, the strange sounds of insects, the croaking of frogs, and the occasional rustle of a large animal passing by would keep them awake. Every night, they wondered if they would see the sun rise the next morning. But Leslie wasn't giving up. Her courage was what kept them all going. The biggest challenge of the entire journey was keeping 11-month-old Christine alive. How do you survive in the jungle with a baby who depends solely on breast milk? This is where Leslie showed incredible ingenuity that would have stunned even the greatest survival experts. She started dissolving the farina, or cassava flour, she had brought with her in water. The mixture formed a drop-like consistency, and this is what she fed her little sister. As long as the flour lasted, it kept Christine alive. But there wasn't a single bottle of clean water in the forest when the thirst became unbearable. They were forced to drink the dirty water that had collected in the forest streams, pits, and leaves. They knew this water could make them sick. They could get a stomach infection. But it was better to take that risk than to die of thirst. Many times, in search of water, they had to wander far. And the danger wasn't just hunger and thirst. The danger was the jaguar. Many nights, the children felt someone watching them from behind the bushes. Jaguars in the Amazon pursue their prey in complete silence. The children held their breath and pressed their faces together so the animal wouldn't pounce on them if it heard their voices. Death hovered over their shoulders every moment. Meanwhile, back in the outside world, when the plane went missing, the government of Colombia was shaken. The president ordered the military to launch the largest rescue mission in history, named Operation Hope. More than 150 commandos and dozens of local tribal searchers were dropped into the jungle. Helicopters began circling over the jungle day and night. But here a great irony occurred. The army dropped thousands of leaflets from the air to get a message to the children. On them was written, "Stay put, we are coming to help." Not only that, they recorded the children's grandmother's voice and broadcast it through a giant loudspeaker into the jungle. "Leslie, my child, stay put." But whenever the children heard the sound of a helicopter or sensed the presence of a human, they would get scared. They had been taught since childhood to be wary of uniformed people or strangers in the jungle. People are cruel out of fear of rebel groups. That's why the children who had come to rescue them were hiding from them. They would slip into the hollow of a tree or lie down in the bushes. It had become a deadly game of hide and seek. The army tracked them. They found their footprints, but by the time they arrived, the children were already gone. They were running away from the very rescue team that was supposed to save them, not realizing that they were their last hope. After a few days, the cassava flour ran out. Now they didn't have a single grain of food left. The children began to get stomach aches from hunger. They became so weak that it was difficult to walk. This is where Leslie's tribal knowledge came in handy again. If we or you were there, we would have probably starved to death or eaten a poisonous fruit. But Leslie turned the jungle into her kitchen. She knew the trees. She found wild fruits like javan soko and avichure. These fruits, though bitter or strange in taste, had enough sugar and energy to keep the children alive. Leslie would carefully pick the fruit. Because in the Amazon, many fruits look juicy, but a single bite can put you to sleep forever. She would taste it herself first, then give it to her siblings. But finding food in the jungle wasn't easy. There were many days when they had to survive on just water. Their ribs were starting to show from hunger. Their cheeks had hollowed out. They were slowly turning into skeletons. But Leslie's will to live wouldn't let them give up. During the rescue mission, the army sent its best sniffer dogs into the jungle had been dropped off. Among them was a Belgian shepherd named Wilson. Wilson had an incredible sense of smell. One day, Wilson ran ahead of his team and reached the children. Imagine what it must have meant for those frightened children to find a friend in that dense forest. The children later said that the dog had played with them. He had eased their loneliness. Wilson's arrival was like an angel visiting them. He gave them hope that the world had not forgotten them. But this story takes a very sad turn here. Wilson, who had become the children's protector, got lost somewhere in the labyrinth of the Amazon. After Wilson was gone, the children were alone again. As the days passed, the number reached 40. Now the children's bodies began to give out. Leslie, Suleni, Tien, and little Christine. All of them were severely malnourished and emaciated. Their clothes were torn. On their feet they didn't have blisters but deep sores. The jungle's insects and mosquitoes had bitten them, riddling their bodies. The wounds were in danger of getting infested with maggots. 4-year-old Tian had become so weak he couldn't even stand. He had to crawl. Little Christine no longer had the voice to cry. They could go no further. They laid down some leaves under a cluster of trees and rested there. It was the moment they probably accepted that the end was near. They just lay there. They're fading. They were counting their breaths. The silence of the forest was now ready to cradle them to sleep. Death stood right in front of them, smiling. Just one more moment, and it would all be over. But the one above had written a different ending to the story. On June 9th, 2023, on the 40th day, a group from the tribal rescue team was passing through the area. Then one of them heard a very faint crying-like sound, as if a kitten was meowing. They became alert and moved in the direction of the sound. They pushed aside the bushes and couldn't believe their eyes. There, under the leaves, lay 4 tiny skeletons. As soon as Leslie saw them, the first words she spoke with what little strength she had left were, "I'm hungry." Another child innocently said, "My mother is dead." Tears welled up in the eyes of the rescue team members. They immediately hugged them. "Miracle, miracle, miracle!" The code was shouted over the radio. The news spread like wildfire. The military helicopters arrived immediately, but the trees were so dense that landing was impossible. So the helicopter hovered, and the children were hoisted up using ropes and a basket. As they were being lifted, they looked like angels floating in the air. 40 days. Yes, for 40 days those 4 children fought anacondas, jaguars, hunger, thirst, and death, and came back alive from that green hell. This is not just a story, but a testament to the human spirit. This is the greatest proof of willpower. Which moment in this story moved you the most? Could you ever muster the courage like Leslie? Be sure to let us know in the comments. And as you leave, don't forget to like the video to salute the spirit of those children. See you in the next video with another story that will give you goosebumps. Until then, Jai Hind.